Hello and welcome to episode 550 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan, as always joined by Evan Silva. The NFL draft is Thursday. Almost makes you feel happy to be alive. On today's show, I will be going full-blown Roger Goodell, presiding over the annual ETR mock draft. For this exercise, we are joined by two of the best mock drafters in the space. By the way, when I say the best mock drafters, I don't use that anecdotally. I use that because these guys actually get their mocks scored every year along with Evan. And our two consistently among the best, it is Scott Smith of 4 for 4 and Ben Standig of The Athletic. Ben, how's it going today?
It's going. There's knock on wood. There hasn't been any ownership news today for real. So any day that happens, it's a good day.
Yes, Ben is responsible for covering the Daniel Snyder situation for The Athletic. Do not envy that. Anyways, Scott, how's it going?
Good, man. Happy to be back. It's always fun chopping it up with these two guys that are the GOATs in the industry. Been toured up champion of last year as far as the mock draft space. So I'm just kind of weighing this down and trying to come in here and add a little bit of my own.
Yes, Ben, the reigning champion. Evan, former champion of the mock draft contest, I believe. How's it going today?
It's going well. Scott Smith is consistently one of the most accurate mock drafters on the planet. Ben Standig has won the Huddle Report twice.
Three times, actually.
Three times.
I mean,
Unbelievable.
Get out of here. That is just
three
ridiculous.
times. Don't short the man. Jesus.
My bad. All right. I capitulate, but we got to be efficient today, though, boys. We got to be efficient. We got to do 31 picks.
This is going to be a very simple process here today. We're going to alternate picks between these three guys. They will be picking on what the team on the clock will do, not what they should do. Let me repeat that. They will be picking what the team they're picking for will do, not what they should do. We also are not including trades here for simplicity's sake. A couple quick housekeeping notes. On Friday morning, Evan and I will be joined by Anthony and Miko to recap round one and do a round two betting preview that will be live stream on our YouTube. Head over there now, hit subscribe. It's free, so you get the reminder for Friday morning's show. Second, this show is indeed sponsored by our friends at Underdog Fantasy, expecting Best Ball Mania 4 to launch soon after the draft, and it's going to be absurd. $15 million prize pool for Best Ball Mania 4 on Underdog. If you don't have an Underdog account yet, promo code ETR will get you a $100 matching sign-up bonus. That's promo code ETR at UnderdogFantasy.com. Before we get to the picks, I just wanted to talk to Ben and Scott quickly about this draft from a high level. The things we've heard, this is a very weak class. You know, most teams only have 15 to 17 guys with round one grades. There's quarterbacks out there getting absolutely slandered in the media like CJ Stroud. There's quarterbacks out there getting slandered by fans like Will Levis, Anthony Richardson. We have a goddamn running back being talked about in the top 10. We have no wide receivers people are talking about. We somehow have this historical tight end class according to people. Scott, I'm curious if you think all this surrounding the draft is unique, makes it harder to mock. Any thoughts on this year's draft as a whole?
Look, the uniqueness is at Houston. They're sitting at 2, and that's going to be where this draft like tilts and either goes off the rails or starts to kind of align. And that's where you're going to see the biggest thing has been you've had slander with both Will Levis early on in this process and Stroud here lately. And I think when you start talking to some of these actual NFL evaluators and coaches, and look, the S2 test has gotten a lot of prominence here in the media this year, but not all of these teams, apply and adhere to this. And I think overall, whenever it comes down to it, these coaches and these evaluators trust their eyes and trust their own system. And when you go back and look at CJ Stroud and what he put out on the field, I think that's going to override some of the concern with this S2 test and some of these other things. Overall, as a class, I think they're weak at certain positions. But when you start and get into some of these edge rushers and defensive backs, they're a little bit deeper in some other positions as well. So overall, it's just another year. The biggest thing is going to be that question mark there at 2 in the front.
For sure. Ben, harder or easier than normal to do your mock drafts this year?
I probably say every year it's harder to do, but this year in particular does feel pretty hard. Like it's been a minute since I took the SAT, but like, when they give you points for writing your name in, for being realistic, somewhere in the first 4 to 6 picks of a draft, typically you can feel pretty confident this team needs X and this guy's considered a stud. Go take this guy. I don't think that's the case here at all. I think starting at 2, the opinions vary all over the place, and all these prospects have some flaws. And I don't just mean little things, but like enough that teams are going, I don't know, even at the top. So I think that does because obviously what happens at the top affects everything behind it. And I think that's what's going to make this one really challenging.
All right. The fans are ready. We are underway. The Carolina Panthers are on the clock in the annual ETR mock NFL draft. Order today is going to be Scott, then Evan, then Ben, Scott, then Evan, then Ben, et cetera, et cetera. So, Scott, you are on the clock with the number 1 pick for the Carolina Panthers.
Look, there's no reason to beat a dead horse here. I think you've seen it in the media over the last 2 weeks, the way the odds have kind of shifted and just the media narrative and everything. Bryce Young is, got the best game film. He overall, the only thing he's missing and concern is the size. I think Carolina has warmed up to him and he's going through the process. And I think Bryce Young's going to be the pick here at number 1. You can put it in Sharpie.
Yep. Bryce Young, the consensus, overwhelming, like 96% implied probability right now to be the number 1 overall pick to the Panthers. Number 2 is where it starts to get interesting. I asked these guys who wants to take number 2 because the whole draft hinges on it. No one responded, so I said, screw it. Actually, Ben responded and said he'd take it, but I said, screw it. Let's just give it to Evan and see what he does at number 2 here. Evan, you are on the clock for the Houston Texans at number 2, and you cannot trade.
Yeah, and the quarterback from Kentucky is currently the betting favorite to go number 2 overall to the Texans. But I don't think that that's what's going to happen. I think that the Texans have enough draft capital that they can maybe use their number 12 pick to move back up. I know we're not doing trades in this one, but I'm going to go with Will Anderson, the edge rusher out of Alabama. The Texans have a ton of needs, and I think that he's the number 1 player on their draft board.
Okay, Will
behind Bryce Young, who obviously went number 1 to the Panthers.
Yeah, and you can get some 5-1 out there right now on Will Anderson to go 2 if you want it. And a lot of that is because a lot of people, or at least some people, think Tyree Wilson, assuming they don't go quarterback, they'd actually take Tyree Wilson over Will Anderson. No, number 2 pick still remains wildly out there. Evan goes with Will Anderson to the Texans at 2. Ben is on the clock at 3. Arizona, the team that clearly wants to trade the most, I think I saw them characterized as desperate to trade out. The problem is that I'm not sure how many teams actually want to move up here. So what are you going to get if you trade out? Anyways, there's no trades in this draft. Let's say Arizona sticks with the pick here. Ben, you're on the clock. Arizona at 3.
And I concur on the trade for them. And I also think whatever they get, if they do it, I suspect they'll do something, will be viewed as underwhelming. Because as I said before, I don't know if anybody is like feeling desperate to move up, but look, quarterbacks are here and there'll be some teams that are going to want one, and this will be a good pivot place to go, especially ahead of the Colts. That said, look, I think you could typically for drafts, we're thinking, how does this help a team this year? The Cardinals, you got to view it, what's going to help them next year, because that's when Kyler Murray will be back, which kind of has me wondering about taking offensive line, but that's not been a projection. None of the linemen have been projected this high, so I'll sort of just stay with conventional thinking to a degree. If Will Anderson's gone, Tyree Wilson's there. Some teams definitely have questions about his foot that required surgery last year and he's not worked out this whole cycle. But Tyree Wilson, defensive end, I think is where I will go. Don't love it, but that's why they want to trade.
There is some smoke out today with Arizona and offensive line. I think I saw some headline at Kyler wanting them to get Paris Johnson. Now, Paris Johnson at 3, I think most people would consider to be a reach, but one of the reasons I think they want to trade back so desperately is maybe offensive line is a real thing, and you can certainly get some long shot prices out there on Arizona to take offensive line or one of those guys. Okay. Bryce Young is gone. Will Anderson is gone. Tyree Wilson is gone. Scott is on the clock at number 4 to the Colts, and you have any quarterback other than Bryce Young available to you, Scott. Go ahead, number 4, Colts.
Yeah, the Colts are going to be taking a quarterback here. There's a lot of division within the industry and within mock drafts out there as to exactly who that quarterback's going to be. There's situations where Arizona could trade out. Is the team going to move up to take, a different quarterback? But here in this scenario, I early on in my process, I basically had Will Levis linked as one of the players that Indianapolis liked even early on in the process. He's also one of the quarterbacks that throughout the process has had a lot of shade thrown at him, but since those S2 scores have come out, he's kind of risen back up ahead of Stroud. So I'm going to go ahead and link Will Levis here to the Colts at 4.
So much smoke around Will Levis and the Colts there. And man, under 4.5 on Will Levis is just getting absolutely pounded. It's like minus 450 now. So we'll see there. On the Will Levis smoke, Evan at 5, the Seattle Seahawks are on the clock. 2 quarterbacks and 2 pass rushers are gone.
Yeah, and I think the quarterback should be under consideration here, but I think that the deal that Seattle gave to Geno Smith, like that quarterback is not going to play in year 1, and he probably isn't going to play in year 2. If Geno can even be 80% as good as he was last year for the next 2 seasons, you don't want to be burning these quarterbacks' rookie contracts. I'm going to go with Jalen Carter, defensive tackle out of Georgia. Now, there have been, I would say, several reports that Seattle is not super keen on him. Jalen Carter, he's got some off-field stuff. He's got some on-field effort sort of concerns, but Seattle is a team that's willing to take risks in the draft, and I think that he is the best player remaining. Seattle, Jalen Carter at number 5.
Yeah, if it wasn't for the off-field stuff, you'd be hearing a lot more about Jalen Carter in the top 5. There's no doubt about that. Certainly one of the big storylines of the top 10, I think, is where does Jalen Carter go? Evan goes ahead and takes him number 5 to Seattle. Ben is on the clock at number 6 now with the artist formerly known as Our Lions, the Detroit Lions. Ben, 6th pick, Detroit Lions.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of hoping Evan would go with the quarterback here because that would let Jalen Carter fall, but also makes it a little bit easier because it would have been still a debate for me for Detroit with Jalen Carter or Devin Witherspoon, the cornerback from Illinois. But I just think at this point, I think that just is the way to go. I mean, it's funny, like 3 months ago, I think a lot of people would have said Detroit needs to take a quarterback to have like their succession plan. But the NFC is so bad that Detroit might come out of this draft being like viewed as the 3rd or 4th best team. So I say they go for immediate help with Devin Witherspoon, cornerback, Illinois.
Yeah, I like that. And I agree with you on Detroit as a whole. They're a big favorite to win the NFC North. And speaking of Devin Witherspoon, Albert Breer tweeted today 2 guys I think the NFL is higher on than people, blah, blah, blah. Number 1 he listed was Illinois cornerback Devin Witherspoon. So for what it's worth. Okay. Scott is on the clock at number 7, the Las Vegas Raiders.
Yeah, so behind the scenes, I have information that Devin Witherspoon is highly rated and valued by the Raiders, and that if he's there at 7, that may be their pick. But here in this situation, been through a little bit of a monkey wrench into things and took him there at 6. So I'm going to pivot and go with the player that I think would also go ahead and fit in. I think, the Raiders are kind of looking at offensive line a little bit. They've been linked a decent bit to Paris Johnson, but that whole defense needs help. And Chandler Jones is getting old, and I'm going to go with a player that compares, similar to Chandler Jones, and that's going to be Tyree Wilson, edge out of Texas Tech.
Tyree Wilson went number 3 to Arizona, if I'm not mistaken. Correct, Ben?
Yes, correct.
Excuse me.
Panic in the Raiders war room. They don't get Devin Witherspoon. All right. They turn in a card of someone who's already been taken. Panic.
We should leave that in, by the way. We should leave that in.
All right, so let's go ahead and pivot. We're going to stick with corner, and we're going to go with Christian Gonzalez, defensive back out of Oregon. They don't get Devin Witherspoon, but hey, they're going to go ahead and get another corner anyway. Look, his relative athletic score is through the roof. He's one of the best players, and I've had a little bit of pushback as far as like Christian Gonzalez being the first cornerback off the board. Over the last 10 years, there's only been one non-underclassman that came off the board as the top cornerback, and that was Trey Waynes in 2015. But I do think Devin Witherspoon is probably going to be the first cornerback off the board, and Christian Gonzalez is the second here.
Yeah. I mean, Detroit and Las Vegas passing on quarterback here is not something that I don't think I would do per se, but I get it to some degree. We still have both CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson on the board as we get to Evan, pick 8, the Atlanta Falcons heading into the year, presumably with Desmond Ridder as their starter. Evan, pick 8 and the Falcons. Go ahead.
And I like how this mock is turning out because the quarterbacks are slipping a little bit. And I think that's what's actually going to happen on draft day. I'm writing an article, 10 things I think about the draft. And I think number 1 is going to be that the quarterbacks are going to slip a little bit further than people think. I mean, they're just behind Bryce Young, who's 5'10", just a lot of flaws in this quarterback class. But I bet the Falcons to draft CJ Stroud at number 8 overall at 22-1, and I'm going to win that in this mock. And we're taking CJ Stroud at number 8 overall, and we're loving it because Desmond Ridder, he's going to be a good backup in the league, but that's what he's going to be in the league. He's going to be a backup to CJ Stroud.
CJ Stroud stops his fall with the Falcons at 8th overall. We move to a team who has committed to Justin Fields as their quarterback. Pick 9 is the Chicago Bears. Ben is on the clock for them. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, so this is one team where I don't have to really worry about quarterback here. Offensive line has felt like, well, if they had stayed at 1, I think we'd all be looking at defensive linemen for sure. And there's a couple of defensive ends on the board, but I feel like offensive line, that position has not been attacked yet here in this mock draft. So I'm going to go with Paris Johnson, offensive tackle from Ohio State, to give the Ohio State quarterback here some more help up front.
Yeah, I mean, Bears just need talent, period, I think, at almost every position. And so, yeah, I think Paris Johnson makes plenty of sense there. 10, we have really interesting spot. Eagles went to Super Bowl last year, of course, have this pick thanks to King Howie. 10th pick, Scott is on the clock for the contending Eagles.
So the Eagles are kind of making a luxury picks here. I think they can move up if Jalen Carter were to slow down. I think there's a good possibility to see them maybe trade up ahead of Chicago with either 7 or 8 there with Atlanta. But here in this position, I think there's 3 players that you can go ahead and look at, and I think that's going to be Lucas Van Ness, Nolan Smith, and then even Peter Skoronski. In this situation, it's been noted that Philadelphia is going to go ahead and probably transition to more of a 3-4. They have Hassan Reddick on one side, and the guy that I like that tends to make the most sense with the contracts and age of some of their edge rushers. I think I'm going to go with Nolan Smith here.
Nolan Smith, yes, classic Eagles pick would be Nolan Smith there at 10. Now, as we get to 11 with Tennessee here, Evan, they should be theoretically doing cartwheels, assuming they have a reasonable evaluation on Anthony Richardson. I have no idea if they do or not. Evan, if board plays out like this, how do you think the Titans would play it at 11 overall?
Yeah, I'm going to pass on Anthony Richardson here. They're going to stick with Ryan Tannehill. They're going to trade Derrick Henry about, it's something that has been rumored about. And they're going to draft Bijan Robinson at number 11. I think that across the league, and I understand our sort of bias against running backs. I mean, it's evidence-based, okay? It's really not biased. It's evidence-based. But I think that across the league, teams value Bijan Robinson in the same way they did Saquon Barkley. And I think he's a top 5 player on like every single team's board, even though he plays a devalued position, because they can justify him as a true playmaker because he's so good in the receiving game. So Titans are going to build their offense around Bijan Robinson for the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. My problem would be like, they're not good enough, I don't think, for Bijan to be the crowning piece on a team. But one thing I would say in Bijan's favor here is that because the draft is so weak, you're going to get to a spot on these teams' boards where Bijan is so far and away the most talented player on a lot of these teams' boards as we get into the teens and stuff like that, that at some point it's God, let me just take the most talented player by 3x or 4x or whatever we have. And so, yeah, I think it's certainly possible. We've also heard Bijan Robinson to Atlanta stuff leaked, which I think would be an absolutely egregious pick, but we've also heard as high as 8 with Bijan Robinson. We will see there. All right. Ben's on the clock at 12 with Houston. In this mock, Evan took Will Anderson with the Texans' first pick. Ben, you're back on the clock here at 12 for the Houston Texans.
Yeah, I'm kind of distracted wondering where Derrick Henry is going now. But that aside, this is a pretty simple one here. I mean, obviously the Texans passed on quarterback at 2, but you're telling me Anthony Richardson is still on the board. Whether he plays this year or not, I personally wouldn't play rookie quarterbacks much. This feels like a no-brainer for Houston. They don't have much else at quarterback, to say the least. So Anthony Richardson, quarterback, Florida.
Agreed. No brainer. Evan, do you want to follow up? We can't leave the people hanging. The Derrick Henry rumor was purported by a guy I watch American Ninja Warrior with my kids about the Derrick Henry.
Akbar Gbaja.
Yeah. And I love the guy. Yeah. Believe me, he's so good on American.
He used to work for NFL Network.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like that dude isn't plugged in. I mean, I don't know if he's going to be right or not, but yeah, he put out the rumor that the Eagles were going to trade for Derrick Henry.
It's just hard to see the Eagles fitting it in the cap, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. Certainly could be some veteran trades. There's been a lot of more veteran trades the last couple of years for sure. Okay. Scott is on the clock for the New York Jets at 13, expecting this Aaron Rodgers trade to be done sooner rather than later. Scott, go ahead, pick 13 to the Jets.
Look, Broderick Jones has been the chalk on most boards, here in a lot of the mock draft industry going here to the Jets. But in this situation, Peter Skoronski drops down. His versatility of being able to have played all 5 positions. There's been some good reports that Mekhi Becton has slimmed down and may end up being able to come back. I think when you start looking at Skoronski, he's the most pro-ready of these offensive tackles. His arms are a little bit short. That's why they tend to project him more as a guard. But I think, he could move inside the guard and be a Brandon Scherf level guard. But if Mekhi Becton's not ready, he's also going to have that versatility to go ahead and kick out the tackle if need be. So he's going to be the pick here for the Jets and protecting Aaron Rodgers.
Okay, Pierce Skoronski to the Jets at 13. Evan is on the clock at 14 for the New England Patriots. I'm sure at this point, the New England Patriots fans will be clamoring for wide receiver help. No wide receiver on yet in this draft. Evan, what say you for Patriots at 14?
Yeah, I just don't think any of the receivers are worth it. Jackson Smith in Jigba probably is talented enough, but he's also sort of limited as a slot receiver. And he barely played football last year. And I think
they just gave Juju a bunch of money.
I'm going with Lucas Van Ness. I think that he's a relatively safe pick. He looks like a Patriot, edge rusher out of Iowa.
Lucas Van Ness to the Patriots at 14 overall. All right. We get back to Ben at 15. Green Bay is in a bit of a rebuild here as they get on the clock to enter the Jordan Love era. Ben, Packers 15.
Obviously, this is, where you could talk about receiver or tight end. We know the history that this is not a thing that the Green Bay, though, does in first round. It would be funny if they did it this year if they move on from Rodgers. That said, there's other ways to help a quarterback and offensive line can do that. Broderick Jones is sitting there. Green Bay always seems to have a billion injuries on their line. So I'm going to go with Broderick Jones, the offensive tackle from Georgia.
Broderick Jones to the Packers. Scott is a Commanders fan from his youth. I don't know if he's still a Commanders fan. However, Scott, 16, the Commanders are on the clock. What say you?
Look, I think they've got a few options. I by no means am the Washington beat reporter on the show today, but as a fan, I'm going to go with the pick that I hope they pick, and that's going to be Darnell Wright. I think there is a lot to be said for a couple other players, specifically in the secondary, whether that be Brian Branch or Deonte Banks are kind of the other 2 players that I'm leading. But I think there's a lot of smoke as far as Darnell Wright moving up the draft period with some of the evaluations. Is he only a specifically just a right tackle? I don't think that necessarily means much. I think Washington would go ahead and move the offensive line around. And for a team that wants to run the ball, I think Darnell Wright would make a bunch of sense.
Yes. Don't tell Darnell Wright that he can only be a right tackle. He may come at you in the DMs. I'll just leave it there. Ben, I'd be remiss to have you on the show and not get your comment here. If the board plays like this, you are the Commanders reporter. Do you agree with the Darnell Wright pick? Do you think it might be someone else for the Commanders?
I do. I think my only question with Wright is he there? There's definitely some people out there who think he's maybe no less than the second best offensive lineman in this class, that he's only that he hypothetically may only be viewed as a right tackle. Could it have some teams limited him? But yes, I think, to me, for Washington, tackle or cornerback / defensive back, if you consider Brian Branch, is the way to go. If you're looking secondary, I would say maybe keep an eye on Emmanuel Forbes. He may be more of a target if they trade down, but his playmaking stands out, and I get a sense that they are at least at a minimum intrigued by him more than, say, Joey Porter Jr., who I don't think is much of a scheme fit for them.
Okay. That was your Commanders beat writer corner portion of the show. We'll move on with the draft now. Pick 17 to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Evan is on the clock for the Steelers.
Yeah, I think the Steelers could go a number of ways with this pick. I think that a certain tight end out of Notre Dame is clearly the best player remaining. Ever? Yes, ever. But I mean, they're not going to draft him with Pat Freiermuth, So I'm going to go with Brian Branch, cornerback, Alabama. You look at the Steelers' depth chart in the secondary right now; it's pathetic. I mean, they're leaning a lot on Patrick Peterson. Keanu Neal might be starting at safety for them. Levi Wallace, Arthur Millette. They need help on the back end. Brian Branch is going to start at slot corner right away in Pittsburgh.
Okay, Brian Branch, some defensive help for the Steelers as they continue on with the Kenny Pickett era. Ben is on the clock, 18 for the Lions' second pick of the draft. Ben also picked for the Lions at pick 6, took Devin Witherspoon, the cornerback. Ben, now 18 Lions.
Yeah, I think with one of these two picks, Detroit's, I don't say have to, but I think they would like to come away with a defensive lineman. They're still, it feels like we've hit the next tier down, but there's still some interesting names. Kalijah Cansey, the defensive tackle from Pittsburgh, he's a guy I'm fascinated to see where he goes. It feels like it could be somewhere here. It could slip, maybe even just to the top of the second round. But I think for Detroit, this makes a sense from a need standpoint. So I'll go Kalijah Cansey, defensive tackle, Pittsburgh.
Yeah, there was some minus 200 out there on Clancy to go in round 1 that I did end up taking. But yeah, I certainly don't feel great about it. But yeah, I think there's a lot of steam around him for sure. 19 Tampa Bay Bucks. God, I mean, the Bucks are out here. Everybody else is talking about all this exciting stuff. The Bucks are out here being like today, we really feel good about Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask. I mean, that's the headline out of Tampa. It is tough scenes right now for them. Scott, 19 Tampa.
Look, the Bucks are in a division that is weak as can be, and I think they're trying to convince themselves that they can still compete. And then you start looking at their team, like I really don't know what the direction of their team is. They're talking about getting rid of Mike Evans, possibly. They need offensive line. A lot of the offensive linemen have kind of fallen off. Anton Harrison might be the one that's left, but this feels like it's too early. Secondary, they lost some players there during the offseason. And so that's the route that I'm going to go is I'm going to go secondary, and I'm going to go Deonte Banks, cornerback out of Maryland.
Deonte Banks. Yes. A lot of people really into Deonte Banks, and this mock Deonte Banks does indeed go ahead of Joey Porter. Evan is back on the clock, pick 20 to Seattle now. Seattle, Evan had a pick 5, took Jalen Carter. Evan back on the clock now for Seattle at pick 20.
Seahawks at number 20. Started off with Jalen Carter, obviously number 5. Jackson Smith-Njigba is, I think, the best receiver in the draft. Tyler Lockett is still really good. He's entering his age 31 season. Jackson Smith-Njigba slots right in at slot receiver. Tyler Lockett can move around, and DK Metcalf is your classic perimeter alpha X. I think the Jackson Smith-Njigba, this team is willing to throw the ball now. They have a lot of faith in Geno Smith. They paid him a lot of money, and let's give him another weapon.
Yeah, it's hard to win in today's NFL without 2 or 3 really, really good NFL wide receivers. I would certainly like this haul for Seattle to come away with both JSN and Jalen Carter. I think that'd be an interesting haul for them in the first round. To Ben for the Los Angeles Chargers at pick 21.
Look, I'm an independent thinker here, but I'm being swayed by Evan's pained expression every time Michael Mayer goes down the board. I think that tight end has been a pick that people wanted to give to the Chargers for a variety of reasons. And I think what makes Mayer stand out to me more than Dalton Kincaid is his ability as a blocker, that he's the better all-around threat. And it gives, fine, you're not giving Justin Herbert an offensive lineman, but you're giving him some help as a blocker and a guy that can catch the ball. So at 21 for the Chargers, I'll go Michael Mayer, tight end, Notre Dame.
Great pick.
Yeah, my only take on that is the Chargers need speed so bad, and they've been linked to Jordan Addison some and guys like that. I think that would be better for Justin Herbert's fantasy outlook, but Mayer's probably just a better player straight up. So yeah, I think that's.
I think if Mayer is gone by now, which he should be, then I think Addison should probably be the favorite.
Yeah,
to be the Chargers.
I mean, they need someone who can get down the field so badly. Do the Chargers? Scott, pick 22. The Baltimore Ravens, embroiled in the Lamar Jackson controversy for the last couple of months. What say you for the Baltimore Ravens at pick 22?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of directions that the Ravens could go. I actually think the Ravens are going to be one of the teams that are looking to trade back. I forget if it's 5 or 6, but they don't have many picks compared to what they normally have on a year in and year out basis. And then Baltimore is also a team that it seems like every year, whenever talent starts to dip and slide down the board, they're the ones that's there to scoop them up and add them to the roster. This particular like spot, I think they're really going to be looking for a cornerback. The two that are kind of left there, you're sitting there looking at Joey Porter Jr., but I'm going to actually go a little bit different route with Emmanuel Forbes out of Mississippi State.
Emmanuel Forbes. A lot of mocks have Forbes to the Giants here, so
I feel like Emmanuel Forbes has picked up a lot of late steam in the process.
Yeah, for sure. Evan, Vikings are on the clock at pick 23.
I'm going to go Miles Murphy, edge rusher out of Clemson. The Vikings went to great lengths last year to address their secondary. Now they need help up front. They need a guy who can get after the quarterback. Miles Murphy is a high effort edge defender. They need dudes up front, period.
Yeah. One of the most talked about props in the whole draft has been how many quarterbacks will go in the first round, over, under 4.5. I think people who have over would be hoping that Hendon Hooker went there at 23 to Minnesota, but not in this mock. It goes Miles Murphy. Now back to Ben at pick 24 to the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah, obviously Jacksonville lost their best offensive tackle in free agency, but it doesn't feel like there's one here that is worth this spot. They also, though, need cornerbacks. Joey Porter Jr. is a guy that's obviously been discussed as sort of a mid-first round pick throughout the cycle. Does feel like he's slipping a bit, but Jacksonville can end that slide right here. So we'll have the Jaguars take Joey Porter Jr., cornerback out of Penn State.
Yes, shout out Penn State. Shout out to Joey. Scott on the clock. New York Giants at 25 overall.
Yeah, the Giants have quite a few needs along both the offensive line and in the secondary. And then even when you start talking about their weapons, they just signed Danny Dimes to quite the contract. And I think they need to get him some weapons. Here, we start talking about how weak of a wide receiver draft this is. Jackson Smith-Njigba was the first one off the board. The issue I kind of have with these three receivers that we have left that are kind of projected to go in the first round is two of them are quite small. And when you start looking at what the Giants have, their wide receivers are all small. So I'm going to give them the bigger one out of 3 left, and we're going to go with Quentin Johnston out of TCU.
That's Quentin Johnston out of TCU. Yeah, talked to Ron on a little bit about the Giants pick. He didn't seem to think that they would take offensive line, or he wasn't confident they would take offensive line. He thinks cornerback or wide receiver, but we'll see there for the Giants at 25. Pick 26, Dallas Cowboys. Evan is on the clock.
We're going to end Dalton Kincaid's little slide here out of Utah. Vertical tight end. I know he's got some issues that at his pro day he showed up. He looked like he weighed 220, 225. He's got a lingering back injury. That's why he slides a little bit. I still think he's a first-round player. I mean, he's a top 10 player in Daniel Jeremiah's top 150. So Dalton Kincaid to the Cowboys.
Dalton Kincaid, pass-catching tight end to replace Dalton Schultz. It is on the clock with an interesting pick. Everybody says the Bills want to make a splash. The Bills want to make a splash. The Bills want to make a splash. I don't know exactly what that means. Some people take that to mean trade for DeAndre Hopkins. Who knows what the Bills are going to do to try to get over the hump and win a Super Bowl here. Ben, what say you on Bills at 27 overall?
If the board fell this way with Hendon Hooker still out there, like this would be a team I could see trading out of the first round to a team that wants to move up. Obviously, we're not doing trades, but just wanted to mention that. Part of me wants to go with an offensive lineman. I'm just always a sucker for building up lines, and Osiris Torrance, the guard from Florida, is still out here. But to your point of a splash, giving Josh Allen another weapon would seem to make a lot of sense to go with what they have with Stephon Diggs. So give me Zay Flowers, wide receiver out of Boston College. I just think that would be a really fascinating guy to join that group. I might have gone Quentin Johnston if he was there, but he is not. So I'll go Zay Flowers from Boston College.
Yeah, Evan and I talked about this a bunch. Like down the stretch, the Bills needed more weapons for Josh Allen. Like it can't just be all Steph Diggs, and Gabe Davis did not have a good year at all. I think Zay Flowers would be an awesome pick for the Bills. Scott, 28, the Cincinnati Bengals are on the clock.
Yeah, I think when you start looking at the Bengals' needs, that secondary is one of the bigger issues they have. But I don't really have, in this scenario, many of the upper levels cornerbacks, and there's really not any other safety besides Brian Branch. So we're going to pivot a little bit. In 2022, the Bengals did a lot of research on all of the tight ends that were in the draft. A lot of analysts are projecting that there could be 3, and I'm going to go with the third one here since Kincaid and that other bum, Michael Mayer, is off the board already. We're going to go with Darnell Washington out of Georgia.
Yes. Love it. So
their new Jermaine Gresham.
Yeah.
Running it back.
This was one I took and we put out at plus 300 or so, over under 2.5 tight ends in the first round. Obviously, I think Kincaid and Mayer will both go in the first round. It just comes down to, hopefully, like Scott said, a team like the Bengals willing to take a shot on this total athletic freak like Darnell Washington. Evan, 29, the Saints are on the clock.
Yeah, I'm good buddies with Nick Underhill. And actually, me and Scott and Nick got a chance to hang out in New Orleans not too long ago. That was a blast. I've talked to him, and he thinks they're going to go edge. And I think that Will McDonald out of Iowa State is higher rated among NFL teams than he is in the media. I actually think he's like a sleeper to be like a top 15 pick. But at number 29, I think he's a no-brainer. They rushed this card in.
Will McDonald to the New Orleans Saints. Ben back on the clock for the NFC East Philadelphia Eagles, making their second pick. This is their own pick, of course. Eagles on the clock at 30, Ben.
So we had them taking Nolan Smith, the defensive end from Georgia, at 10. They needed D-line depth, so they've at least done that at a minimum. Guard, they obviously lost one in the offseason, but I don't know. I don't know if I see that. I'm going to go with a bit of a wild card here. I'm one of those people who thinks they should take a longer look at Bijan Robinson at 10, simply because they've got this window right now. They're going to be the clear favorite in the NFC. Take advantage of it. So instead, with Bijan long gone, Jahmyr Gibbs, running back out of Alabama. I mean, playing with this team behind that line, I think he could be the rookie of the year. So give me Jahmyr Gibbs, running back Alabama at 30.
Yeah, and the Gibbs stuff today, I mean, I don't know if this is agent-driven or what, but McShay is out here saying that teams have Bijan and Gibbs close together, Gibbs ahead. Peter King said the same thing. He's talked to teams that have Gibbs rated ahead of Bijan. I mean, I don't know that I buy any of this stuff, but there's certainly a lot of Jahmyr Gibbs smoke right now as him being a first-round pick. That line has absolutely cratered. Over under 1.5 running backs in the first round is down to like minus 105, minus 110 on the over.
At a minimum, I mean, there have been people throughout this time who have said he's like a top 15 prospect. And in a year in which nobody likes anybody, maybe talent wins out.
Agreed. Scott, last pick. This is a 31 pick, round 1 this year. The Kansas City Chiefs on the clock for the final pick of the ETR mock draft. Scott, go ahead for the Chiefs.
So a lot of mock drafts have had, the Kansas City basically going at either edge or tackle. They did go ahead and add a few pieces, but I think at tackle, I think they're a little bit more comfortable starting Lucas Niang at right tackle than what many people maybe think. And along edge, look, they let Frank Clark go ahead and test the free agency waters. He has not signed with anybody. I think it's a strong possibility that, when you have a team that's in championship contention every year and you have a player like Frank Clark that thinks so highly of Andy Reid, I think you could see a reunion at a reduced rate, here during the offseason, maybe after the draft. So I don't think edge is as big of a need as what some people think. Jordan Addison is going to be the player that has slipped down here in a mock draft. They do still have a need at wide receiver. I think they would go ahead under this circumstance and go ahead and take Jordan Addison. And from my perspective, whenever I'm trying to get these mock drafts as accurate as possible, a big thing is trying to get as many of the top 32 players into the first round as possible. And, looking at the way the board fell, looking at the person, that we have there in Jordan Addison and a need to wide receiver, he's going to be the pick for Kansas City here to round out the end of the first round.
I hope you're aware, Scott, that if the Chiefs do take Jordan Addison, fantasy Twitter is going to absolutely lose their minds. They're going to be calling Jordan Addison the next Tyreek Hill before things get away from you.
Does Sky Moore just stink? Is he just done?
The overwhelming sentiment, I would say,
It's
you can
not
get
positive. I'd say it's not positive on
it's
him right
bad.
now.
I talked about that on Market Monday. Like nobody wants. You can get Sky Moore in fantasy right now at like pick 180 overall or something crazy like that. I mean, it's no one wants Sky Moore.
Some names that did not make it in.
Yes.
Joey Porter Jr. did not make it in.
Yes,
Is that
he
correct?
did. He did.
Or he did. Okay.
He went to Jacksonville at 24. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Jalen Hyatt, Tennessee wide receiver. He's a guy that I think that teams are not as high on as the media potentially. I mean, I've heard like Jalen Hyatt sucks from people. And then Joe Tippmann is a guy who I think could make it into the back end of the first round. I don't know. Any other guys stand out to you guys that didn't make it in the top 31?
I talked to a couple teams over the weekend who when I was trying to get a read on like Hendon Hooker, and they seem to think pretty good chance he does go. But the problem is when you get past Minnesota at 23, what team is taking him? It's hard that somebody's gonna have to trade in at that point. And that's where it gets challenging. Of course, we've seen people suggest he could go top 15, so that's a whole other world.
I think trading back into the first round to get that 5th-year option on Hendon Hooker, like we've talked about before, makes a lot of sense for that back end of the first round.
Brian Brzee, the defensive tackle from Clemson, another guy who was typically in first rounds, that he also did not make it here.
Yeah, and the one player that I would add that I'm a huge fan of and was the top player on a freak list this year, and that's going to be Mazie Smith, defensive lineman out of Michigan. I think he's got a few teams, specifically with his athleticism, the way he moves at his size and what he can do, like Buffalo and even Cincinnati there. I think teams in that range could all be looking at him as one of the late first round picks.
All right. This is awesome. Always a ton of fun hanging out with you guys doing this mock. Appreciate the time. I know it's a super, super, super busy week. Ben, tell the people where they can find you on the Twitter machine, where they can find your work.
At Ben Standig. I feel like we have to spell these things out these days on Twitter. At Ben Standig on Twitter. And again, of course, follow me on find me on The Athletic, both the written word and on all my podcasts, Standig Room only.
Yeah, I'm such a big fan of The Athletic. I have no interest. I have no stock or anything athletic whatsoever, but I love The Athletic because it's
me too.
Like so deep, and
it's such a clean read too.
Yeah.
Like on their app. I mean, they've done a great job.
And if you're into the draft stuff, Dane Brugler's Beast comes with your subscription to The Athletic. I don't know why I'm shilling The Athletic so hard, but anyways, Dane Brugler's Beast is awesome, and it comes with your subscription, and it's every single prospect, everything you want to know. He has like where these kids, like what happens with them with like their 6th grade teacher and stuff like that. It's completely insane.
I'm into like the food show competition shows. Don't ask me why. And like one of the prospects, it said that his dad is a frequent contestant on like Chopped. And I was like, what?
I know, it's so crazy. Scott, tell the people where they can find you and where they can find your work.
Yeah, so 4for4.com has been gracious enough to house me in my mock drafts. I've also been doing a podcast, Move the Line, with Connor Allen and Ryan Noonan. So we're actually going to have Anthony Amico on tomorrow. Look, you can find me on Twitter at Scott Smith FF. I'll be out in those Twitter streets, pressing that heart button on any Michael Mayer slander tweets. That's just how I'll be rolling.
We're gonna have to have a discussion. Sounds like.
Oh God, it's so funny. The last like 4 guests we've had have all been like, Michael Mayer. I don't know. And I don't think they're doing a bit. I actually think that the Michael Mayer stuff is shaky. Anyways,
well, not Renner though. Renner loves him.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Notre Dame freaks. Okay, that's gonna do it for this mock draft. Evans, things he thinks about the NFL draft will be up late tomorrow night. The Silva mock draft 2.0 will be up Wednesday night. Thursday, we have the draft, of course. Friday, be sure you stay tuned for that YouTube show. For Evan, for Ben, for Scott, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.